Afrikalı Leo, Semerkant, Doğu'nun limanları gibi birçok kıymetli eserin sahibi Amin Maalouf'un yeni kitabı T24'te'sin dostları çıktı. Amin Maalouf da bugün bizi kırmayıp T24'te konuğumuz olmayı kabul etti. Maalouf'la bugün umudu, geleceği, günümüzü, koronavirüs günlerinde nasıl yazdığını, Orta Doğu'yu ve daha birçok konuyu ele alacağız. Hello, Mr. Maalouf. Very nice to have you
Hello.
here today. So,
Thank you.
I'd like to talk a little about, as it has been inevitable these days, your days in coronavirus. So, most of us have been in our home for the majority of the past year. And I know for a lot of writers, it has been hard to write during this time, as there's not a lot to draw influence from. So I'd like to ask, has it been harder to write for you in the past year? And where do you draw your inspiration from during these days?
I wouldn't say it was hard to work. What was hard was all the rest. From the beginning of the pandemic, I lost a number of friends, and 2 days ago, again, I lost a very dear friend. And throughout
I'm sorry to hear that.
this year, it was a really very, very saddening and disturbing. But on the level of working, it didn't change much for me, because usually I don't go out very often. I stay at home, I work, it's very quiet. It was, of course, even more quiet and more settled during the pandemic. I didn't see many friends. I didn't even see my children or grandchildren. So I had a lot of time, a lot of serenity for writing, but at the same time, whenever I looked around me, it was a very stressing moment, very trying moment.
Okay, so in Turkish, there's a really cliche saying, I know that there are in other languages too, that goes that there are no happy novelists. So I'd like to take a general view from you. Do you believe literature takes best influence from deprivation and sadness or pain?
I think we need both. We need joy and we need pain, and life gives us all of it. So one has to take what life gives you. There are moments of hope. There are moments of despair. There are moments of joy and pain. There are moments of sickness. There are moments of loss, and all of it uh, uh, influence the writer and his writing. And the world today is very complicated, very complex, very difficult to understand, and this stress also is very useful, I would say, for a writer, because everything in the world needs to be examined very thoroughly and with insight. You cannot just describe the appearance of things. You need to go deeper, and so I think it's a marvelous moment in history, and of course it is also very stressful.
And talking about influences from feelings, I'd like to ask influences from geography. I know that you were born and you grew up in Lebanon, in Beirut, and taken into general, as a Middle Eastern, For us Middle Easterns, there's always a crisis going on in our region, always a confrontation, another conflict. Today, as we record this, marks the 10th anniversary of start of Syrian civil war. I know in your hometown last year there was a huge explosion. So I'd like to ask how where you come from affected your writing.
No, when I began to discover the world around me, I've always loved history, and my feeling was when I was maybe 14 or 15 was that all history has already happened, and I'm coming too late, and nothing very serious is happening. For example, I read a lot about the two world wars. I read a lot about the Spanish Civil War, and all that seems fascinating for somebody who loves history. And then things began to happen very close to me, too close to me, and to affect me directly. The different conflicts in the Middle East, which of course I remember because the first very important conflict was 1967, and I remember it very well. I lived through it, and then there are many other conflicts, and of course the beginning of the Lebanese war, and it so happens that I was a witness for the first very serious incident of the war, and then all what happened in the last 60 years almost. I've been following the life of our area and the rest of the world, but our area itself is fascinating. You know, it's of course there is a lot of despair, there is a lot of frustration, and we would have liked this area to evolve very differently, to become the center of modernity and thought, and so many things that were possible in that part of the world, and in my home city, Beirut. It was for some time center of writing and printing and media, and so, and then I saw all of that collapse. I saw Lebanon collapse. I saw more recently after the Arab Spring, to call them that way. I don't like this notion, but well, that's how people call them. And of course, I was like so many people, enthusiastic when I saw these movements in so many places at the same time, from Tunis to Yemen to Syria to Libya, Egypt, of course, and then I will seem very desperate, but every time in this part of the world there is hope, it is followed by despair. Every time we expect something, we hope for something, then there is the collapse, and all the hopes collapse, and we go back to wailing and crying and say, "Oh, that was a missed opportunity." A friend of mine told me, in this part of the world, we never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity, and in a way, it is the very sad experience we have. So again, the hope that we had of change in all these countries was a very legitimate hope. And I think it was possible to expect real change instead of suffering and war and.
I think that was a great explanation for Middle East hope and despair. But I really want to ask, why don't you like it being called Arab Spring?
I've been a journalist for many years, and my father was a journalist and grew up in this and in this milieu. And we have a tendency to take a name and then use it again. So we had the Prague Spring or Czech Spring, and then we had, every time there was an uprising, we tend to use the same terms, and it doesn't really explain what is spring. Spring is a season. So I prefer descriptions that are more accurate, that explain really what's happening, not just a poetic word. I use poetic words sometimes, but we need to understand what happened, why people rebelled, what was the meaning of this rebellion. And people never rebel unless there is a good reason to rebel. And there are not two rebellions that are the same. What happens in Prague or in Peking or in elsewhere is not like what happened in Tunis or Sana'a or Damascus or Aleppo. Every situation is really very, very different. So I like expressions that are more precise, that say really what we are witnessing, rather than use a cliche.
Okay, so in your answer, there are two concepts I really want to talk about, which is hope and the future. But before all that, I want to ask, what do you think of Turkish literature, and who are some of your favorite writers from Turkey?
Well, I'm not a great connoisseur of Turkish literature. I read a few books, but I'm not sufficiently. My knowledge is not sufficiently deep, so I would give an opinion. I had the chance of meeting a number of writers. I discovered also very ancient writers like Yunus Emre, and I find there is a great literature. That's obvious. There is a great literature, and I enjoy many works of the literature, both modern and ancient. But I'm not able to give a more a deeper appreciation, because my knowledge is not sufficiently wide.
Okay, so in your book, in your or collections, in Adrift, you say that the world has lost its way. So I'd like to ask you, do you think coronavirus pandemic might be a wake-up call?
I hope so. It's certainly not an ordinary event. I think it is a milestone. Absolutely. I'm sure of that. It's obviously a milestone. Obviously, things will not be the same after it, but we are still too close to the event to be able to see where it is going to lead us. I think it should be, and it could be, a wake-up call. I think it never happened before that all of humankind has to pause just like that and watch and suffer and contemplate at the same time the same reality. I think this is really a defining moment. My hope is, in the spirit of the book you just mentioned, that we understand that we are going towards a catastrophe. we are going to be shipwrecked. And if we take advantage of what happened in the last year and re-examine why it's going in such a direction, how could we change our course? I think that would be fantastic. Are we going to do it? I don't know. I don't know. I hope so. I hope so. There are many people. I know that many people are thinking about the future, about changing course, about how leaders manage the crisis, what went wrong. Uh, there are so many aspects that are fascinating, and I know that people are aware of it, are thinking about it. Will it be enough to give us the wake-up call that we need, for example, to tackle the climate change, to tackle all the problems of tackling diversity in the world, or the problems of the disappearing world order, because there is no more any world order. We are in a kind of jungle. So if we take a moment to think, reflect, and quietly look to the future, well, maybe something could change.
Okay, now I want to talk a little about your new book, which is called Our Unexpected Brother and Empodoktes in dostları in Turkish. And I'd like to ask, usually your books take place in a historical environment, but for this book, you decided to pick future as a playground. So I'd like to ask you, what pushed you to this decision?
Well, it is not a distant future. It's tomorrow morning. It's an event that could have taken place today. As we were saying, the world is on the verge of a catastrophe, of collapse, and this is something I've been feeling for many years, and the titles of my books are very clear about it, whether I speak of a shipwreck, whether I speak about a disordered world of murderous identities, or all of that. I have been obsessed by the fact that we are going toward the catastrophe. And then I began to think, what if at the last moment before a catastrophe, something happens that prevents us from falling? And the idea is, of course, it's a kind of parable. Maybe at the last moment, something happens, something that comes from the deepest moments of human adventure, moments in which people used to have a very comprehensive view about humanity, when people did not automatically separate philosophy from science, from medicine, from politics, when everything was considered to be human knowledge and human behavior. And maybe we need to go back to a moment of that kind. So Empedocles was the symbol of that moment. Maybe because this personality has always fascinated me. He was as you know, a philosopher who lived 24 centuries ago in Sicily, and he one day he was a strange person because he was uh, very well known for being a healer, of course, a philosopher, and uh, people saw him as a half mythical, half divine figure. And one day there was an eruption of the Etna, and he went to the volcano and he disappeared. And nobody knew if he just jumped in the volcano or he fell, or I don't know what could be the explanation. And uh, this disappearance created a myth. So a novelist is always fascinated by mythological events or events that take a mythological dimension at one point in history. So that is that were the two elements that from which stemmed the novel.
And you touched a little bit about this, but you also mentioned this is a not so distant future. But in the book, that, as you said, the world doesn't really seem really different. We are still at edge of mutually assured destruction. Also, East and West is still on each other's throats. So the future looks bleak in the book. So I'd like to ask a general question about, do you think this future is inevitable? And also, how do you think we can build a better future?
Nothing in history is inevitable, but I think it would take a lot of effort and almost a miracle to avoid a catastrophe. We are really going straight towards a catastrophe. In the previous book, I said we're going straight toward the iceberg, like the Titanic. And I still feel that. I still feel we are going in the wrong direction, and we might hit an iceberg. Uh, it is not inevitable, and as you said a few minutes ago, it is possible that what happened this year might make people pause and think about changing course. But uh, if we just follow what is happening now, we are going obviously toward a new confrontation. It will not be, you said East and West, it will be East and West, in fact, although it will be different from that confrontation of East and West that we knew in the last century. It will be something different. It will be probably the West and the Confucian world, China and its neighbors, and that confrontation uh, will not be like other confrontations because we have reached a level of technology that might make any uh, arms race a suicide for humanity. So, to imagine an arms race today is unbelievable. Just the fact that we can envisage it, as if we were reacting what happened between the United States and the Soviet Union a few decades ago. It will not be the same. It will not be the same because the possibilities of destruction with the cyber war, with the biological wars, with all what is possible today with the miniaturization of atomic weapons. If we go towards a new Cold War, it could be the end of mankind. So we need to change our course. We need to avoid a confrontation. We need to rebuild the world in a non-confrontational way. This has always been, as you know, my theme throughout what I write. We are different, but we do not need to fight against each other and to exclude each other and to massacre each other because we are different. We need to build a world in which we can live together. Of course, we are different, but we can be a huge human nation with all kinds of cultures, of languages, of creeds, of colors, and live together and organize our life together and fight the real enemies, like the Queen says at the end of my novel, to fight the real enemies: ignorance, disease, and death.
To tie into this, I'll say I was talking with one of our most experienced colonists the other day, Hassan Jamal, who's a good follower of you, and he reminded me of a quote of yours that goes, "The tomorrows I believed in now remain in yesterday, and they have never returned." So hope is a recurring concept in your books. So I'd like to ask how hope is a device for your literature, and also I'd like to ask, have you completely lost your hope for today?
Certainly not. I think a writer has two obligations. One is an obligation of lucidity and truth, to see the world as it is, not to make a maquillage to hide the reality. And the second obligation is not to despair. Always try to find a way out of the mess where we are. Even if it is difficult to find a way, try again. You cannot write to tell your readers, well, there is no hope. I will never do that. If I feel that there is no hope, I wouldn't write. I stop writing and then look for a reason to hope, because life must produce hope, and hope produces life, and life is something marvelous. And even if we look at our time, and of course it's very stressful, and there's so many saddening things that are happening around us, yet it is a fascinating moment in history. We have all the knowledge of history from from our home. We can get all the knowledge. We can be in contact with everybody. We can speak to everybody in the world from our homes through the modern tools that were given to us by technology. It is a privilege for our generation. Nobody before us had it. Nobody before us dreamed of having. Not even when I came to France a few decades ago, there was no personal computer. There were no cell phone. There was no programs for writing on screen. Everything was so different, and that's my lifetime. It's not, and things are changing again and again, and it's just that it's fascinating to observe. So we have no right to say all that is nothing. There is nothing, no hope. No, we need to preserve what is beautiful in today's life, to do whatever we can do to avoid destruction, to avoid collapse. And we can do it because we can talk to each other. we can discuss, we can argue, we can wake people, say, well, there are things that are going on, and you have to be aware of them and try to change course. So it is a marvelous moment, certainly not a moment for despair.
Okay, so I'll just kind of go off and gonna try to ask a more private question. I was wondering, what do you think was the biggest decision you made in your life?
There are many decisions that are important. One very important decision, and that one I was a bit forced to take it, was to come to France. And I was not in Lebanon one of the many people who dreamt of going away. Not at all. I always, when I was young, I was sure I would spend my life in my country of birth. And then the war came, and I was eyewitness to the first event of the war, and I was struck by it, and I understood that I needed to go somewhere else. So that was a very, very important decision for me. Another very important decision was 8 years later. So it was in '84 when I decided that I want to devote my whole life to writing. So it was a difficult decision because I had to leave my work and my salary and just invest myself totally in writing my first novel, which was Leo the African, and that was a very, very risky decision, but I wanted to take it because I was writing that book, and I felt if I don't give it all my life and all my time, I would regret it.
What a great decision that turned out to be for all of your readers around the world. And I'd like to, so I know that Beirut plays a big role in your life, and also France plays a huge role in your life as where you still live. And all of them connecting. Identity is always a big concept in your books that I observe. So I'd like to ask, do you think you'd be a different person if you never moved to France, or if you moved to France when you were younger? What do you think?
No, certainly. I think every decision we take in our life changes many things. No, probably if I had remained in Lebanon, I would have had a very different life. I would have written in Arabic probably because I began to work in an Arab language newspaper. I would have probably spent more time in politics because I was interested there, and I had many friends who had political activity. I don't know, maybe I would have gone to parliament, or I don't know. And in any case, when I decided to move from one country to another, this kind of events could not take place anymore. I had to choose. Many other things. One never writes the same books in different languages. No, language influences what we write, and everything would have been different in my life. But in life, it's not only the great decisions that change things. Even small decisions, very small decisions, can change the rest of the life. Sometimes you decide not to go out for one day, or to go out, and when you go out, you meet somebody, or you have like an accident, or in a split second, anything can change in life. So one has to be open to all what changes in life. And I have the same attitude today with what's happening around us, with the pandemic. I hate what I see, yet I'm interested by the very particular event that we are going through, which nobody had experienced before. No generation has experienced before us. So one has to be open to what happened, open to life, to all the events of life, and try to make the best of them.
Mr. Maalouf, thank you so much for answering our questions.
Thank
It
you.
has been great to talk to you, and hope to see you again soon.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you.